is noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. People will continue to join, and that is completely fine. Thanks for joining us today for this session of Keeping Kids Safe that's focused on substance use. My name is Christy Ganya, and I'm from the Telehealth ROCKS program. A little bit about Telehealth ROCKS. We are a federally funded program that focuses on school-based behavioral health, and we do this by working on social determinants, supporting school-based services, and telementoring trainings like this one. I have just a few notes for you if you want to, we're on the right slide. This session is being recorded and we will send it to you afterwards. Your microphone has been muted. Feel free though, if you would like to chime in or have a question to unmute or type in the chat box. And then certificates of attendance will be emailed after the series. So please make sure your first and last name are either visible on your Zoom screen or type it in the chat so that we can track attendance and make sure we're getting your certificates to you. We can go to the next slide. So we don't have any disclosures, and all of our presentations are based on the best information that we know at the time and evidence-based. We can go to the next slide. And then just a few reminders about after this session. We'll send you the slides and recording as soon as they are processed. We do send certificates of attendance because this series is kind of a year-long one. We're going to split them up. We will send them in December for all of the hours you attended this fall, and then in April for the spring sessions. And then if there are any questions that you have from the session that didn't get answered, feel free to email those to us. We'd be happy to help out with those. And the email should also be in the chat box for you there. All right, those are all of the reminders. I will hand it off to Lydia to get us started.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us this afternoon. My name is Lydia Fuqua. I'm a prevention program manager at DECA, and later you'll be hearing from my colleague Ariel Cohn, who is a prevention specialist at DECA. Just a little bit about DECA before we dive into the content. We are a nonprofit agency, and we provide a variety of human services. Our goal is really to enrich and improve the quality of life for adults, youth, children, families. We provide residential and outpatient behavioral health care, fostering and adoption services, family preservation services, and then traffic safety and substance use prevention services for the state of Kansas as well. So that's where Ariel and I are coming to you from. We're based in Lawrence. But we have offices, locations for DECA in Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa. So in Kansas, you'll find us in Lawrence, the Kansas City area, Topeka, Wichita, Pittsburgh, and Pratt as well. So that's a little bit about us. We're getting ready to celebrate our 50th anniversary. So we've been around for a little bit. Here is what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to look at some new data and trends related to youth substance use in Kansas. We're going to explore the connection between mental health and drug and alcohol use just briefly. We'll dig into the risks associated with drug and alcohol use, particularly for young people. Then we'll talk through some warning signs that a young person might be using. Finally, we will wrap up with considering some upstream approaches and then talking through some supports and treatment resources for young people. And then we'll provide you with an example from our community. So briefly before we begin, we want to cover the topic of addiction and stigma. And I'd like to start with addiction. I'd love to hear from you all in the chat. When you hear the word addiction, what comes to mind for you? What comes to mind when you hear the word addiction? Yeah, seeing some answers come through in the chat here. Yeah, pain, trapped, unable to go without, loss, out of control. Yeah, great answers. Thank you all. Those are really good examples of how we might think about addiction. I think it's important to understand that drug addiction doesn't depend on how much, or rather, different things in our lives. So what kind of job we have, our age, our race, our gender identity, how much money we make, right? Addiction is a chronic disease of the brain, and it causes people to take drugs or alcohol repeatedly, even if it's causing harm to their life. And it can happen to anyone, right? Addiction is very complex. I think there's this common misconception that addiction is a choice, and people can stop using when they want to. And this is what leads to stigma. So, stigma of the self, societal and social stigma, and then structural stigma, right? Those policies and practices. So, when we're talking about stigma, we're talking about those negative beliefs about or negative attitudes towards a specific group of people, in this case, folks experiencing addiction. And the issue with stigma is that it creates false stereotypes, it spreads misinformation, and ultimately keeps people from getting the care that they need. So those who are experiencing addiction might avoid seeking help out of fear of being labeled or other potential consequences, right? Like getting in trouble. So I think part of our role in digging into this content today is to work to break down that stigma and ensure that people get the support that they need. Okay, let's start with just a little bit of data to sort of level set here. So this data comes from the Kansas Communities That Care Student Survey. For those of you who don't know, this is a survey that's conducted annually and anonymously with 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in Kansas. It provides us very valuable data on the health risk behaviors and opinions of students in our schools today so that we can identify and fund the programs and activities that our communities need. So this data that you see on the screen is 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who have drank alcohol, vaped, used marijuana, or engaged in prescription drug misuse at least once in the last 30 days. The first thing that I want to point out is that by far, the majority of young people in Kansas don't use substances, and that's great, right? Sometimes we tend to think that most youth are using or that's the norm, but the data shows that's not the case. So I want to be really clear about that. You can see also on the screen that alcohol is still the most widely used substance. Overall, substance use is trending downward, which is great news, though vaping and marijuana have stayed pretty consistent since 2021. So this is the percentage of 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in Kansas who say there is no risk of harm associated with using these substances. You can see that the numbers have fluctuated over time, though all seem to be trending down a bit with some fluctuations towards 2022 and 2023 data. And then this is 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who report their family doesn't have clear rules about alcohol and drug use. This number is rising, and we want it to be trending down because we want families to be having conversations around alcohol and drug use. So I think that's important to mention as well. Now we're going to just briefly dig into some drug trends that we're seeing here in Kansas. I'd also love to hear from you all in the chat while I'm talking through some of these trends, what the number one substance use issue you're seeing in your community might be. Is it vaping? Is it fentanyl? Is it marijuana concentrates? Or is it something else entirely? Just love to hear kind of what you're seeing in your communities. So let's start with vaping. So we know that youth smoking rates have gone down significantly over the last few decades, but we also know that vaping rates continue to rise. This is because of tobacco companies, big tobacco. They need youth to keep their enterprise strong. They need to replace the users who die early from tobacco illnesses. That's an unfortunate fact, but it is the reality of the tobacco industry. And they do this very well by marketing through a variety of mechanisms, including offering discounts on flavored e-cigarette products, frequent social media ads with, attractive, fun, young adults having a good time, sponsoring things that are popular for youth, like festivals, music festivals, other events, promoting flavors that appeal to kids, and they're often sold next to things like toys and candy. We are seeing some regulation surrounding this, but historically with vaping, that has been the case. And then with devices that are targeting youth, you can see on the screen that image on the top left. This is the newest device that we've seen on the out on the World Wide Web, which are vaping devices disguised as highlighters. We've also seen devices disguised as car key fobs, hoodie strings on a hoodie, cell phone cases, backpacks, watches, you name it. If you're over 21, do you need to disguise your vaping? No, now because it's legal for you. So it's very clear that the industry is targeting youth. As the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, cracks down on vaping, the companies are continuously coming up with new and innovative approaches to attract youth. So that's one drug trend on our radar. The second one I want to cover is marijuana, the image in the top right. So today's marijuana is much more potent than anything we've ever seen. So for some context, average potency was about 4% THC in the 80s and averages about 15% THC today. And then marijuana extracts, known as concentrates, which you can see on the screen. These are concentrates used in like dabbing and edibles. They can contain an average of 50 to 90% THC. What that means is the higher the potency, the smaller amount it takes to get someone high, and the faster it can take effect. We also know that it increases its addictive potential. So about 1 in 10 marijuana users will become addicted. And for youth, that number is even higher. About 1 in 6 youth who use marijuana before the age of 17 will become addicted. We also know that today's marijuana, because of that increased potency, can cause things like hallucinations, delusions, psychosis, impaired memory, and disorientation as well. Another drug trend that we want to cover is fentanyl. Fentanyl has gained attention, and rightfully so, because of its high potency in connection to increasing overdose deaths. Many of those deaths are from illicitly manufactured fentanyl. Data from the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA, suggests that 6 in 10 illicitly manufactured pills contain a deadly dose of fentanyl. So that number is incredibly high. Fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, and a deadly dose of fentanyl is so small it fits on the tip of a pencil, which you can see on the screen in the bottom right image. It's important to note that youth prescription drug rates continue to be low for Kansas. However, we've seen a rise in youth overdoses related to fentanyl. And anecdotally, we can see a connection between social media and an increased access to drugs as a potential connection to that increase for overdose deaths. And we'll cover social media here in just a moment. The image on the bottom left are synthetic cannabinoids, which is another drug trend that we're seeing here in Kansas as well as nationally. So we're talking about Delta 8, Delta 9, HHC. These are all psychoactive substances found in the cannabis sativa plant, the same plant that produces THC. These substances, these chemical makeups, they're produced naturally by the cannabis plant, but they're not found in significant amounts in the plant. So as a result, concentrated amounts of things like Delta 8 THC are typically manufactured from CBD. These products can be found in gas stations and smoke shops. They're very accessible to youth. They're currently unregulated. So it's important for us as adults in the community to be aware that Delta 8, Delta 9, HHC, these products are hemp derived, but they have been chemically altered to be psychoactive. And they also haven't been evaluated or approved by the FDA for safe use in any context. I also wanted to just briefly share that the Midwest high intensity drug trafficking area has identified that marijuana, methamphetamine, and fentanyl are the most widely available and widely used drugs in the Midwest HIDA region, which would be North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. And lastly, I wanted to share a little bit about social media. So with the growth of social media and smartphones and the use of smartphones, we have sort of a dangerous and deadly new drug threat. And that is that illicit drug networks are using social media to expand their reach. This includes selling those deadly fake fentanyl pills, methamphetamine pills, often to unsuspecting teenagers or young adults, older Americans who think that they're buying something different. Smartphones have really become a one-stop shop to market, sell, buy, and deliver deadly illicit pills. So it's important to keep that in mind as well as we think about the youth that we're serving and how accessible things might be to them. So those are just a couple of trends that we wanted to cover really briefly. And now I want to spend just a moment talking about the connection between substance use, mental health, and trauma. I want to start with two quick true or falses, and I would love for you to type your answer in the chat. So true or false, substance use can impact mental health. True or false? Yes, I'm seeing lots of truths come through the chat. Very good, very good. How about another one? Mental health can impact substance use. Is this true or false? Yes, seeing lots of truths still coming through and some head nods from those of you with your webcams on. And you all are absolutely correct. There is certainly a complex relationship between substance use and mental health. We know that substance use and addiction can contribute to the development of mental illness. We also know that studies suggest people with a mental disorder like anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, may use drugs or alcohol as a form of self-medication. We also know that substance misuse or substance use has been shown to impact mental health conditions and vice versa. Um, and we also know that in the long term, using substances to self-medicate for a mental health condition is likely to make the problem worse. So our challenge is to help young people understand the impacts of substance use early and often, and if necessary, connect them to help so that they can learn different coping mechanisms that are healthier for them in the event they might be experiencing a mental health challenge. I also want to take a moment to talk about the relationship between trauma and addiction. So, what we know is that individuals who experience trauma face greater risk of developing substance use issues. When I say trauma, I mean an event in our life that overwhelms our ability to cope. It's also important to understand that each individual's perception of what is traumatic may differ depending on a multitude of things, including our personal level of resiliency, for example, and the support networks that we may or may not have. So, individuals who experience trauma face greater risk of developing substance use issues. And that's because when we experience trauma, our safety feels threatened, right? Our minds and our bodies respond in three ways. Fight, flight, or freeze, right? Many of us are familiar with this concept. These reactions put us in lizard brain, survival mode, and it triggers the release of certain chemicals and hormones in the body that affect things like heart rate and blood flow, memory formation, blood sugar, right? When our body is under constant threat with little recovery time, our stress response reactions don't return to normal. So they may get stuck. That ultimately strengthens our brain's survival connections and reduces the number of connections formed in the brain overall, therefore making our brains and bodies more vulnerable to chronic health conditions like substance use disorder. Substance use also increases the risk of suicide, domestic violence, and other chronic health conditions as well. So I think this is a really important connection to understand when working with young people who may be engaging in substance use, and additionally working with young people who may have experienced trauma or experienced mental health conditions. All right. One thing that we often get questions about is related to the genetics of addiction. I want to share with you all, and this is information that youth seem to be interested in as well, is that genetics account for about 40 to 60% of the risk for substance use disorder. And there's no genetic test to identify or predict substance use disorder. So one thing that I think is helpful when sharing this information with young people is to communicate to them that if we make the decision to try substances, we're taking a risk because there's no way to know if we are at a genetic predisposition for substance use disorder on our own. So you can see some risks on the screen associated with substance use. When talking with young people, we often identify the impacts that matter most to them. So substance use can alter issues in their lives with school or sports or clubs or with friends or family. It can alter relationships in their lives that are meaningful to them. when we are under the influence, we're more likely to make poor choices, right? We can also experience things like loss of energy and interest and things that we used to enjoy, or impaired vision or decision-making skills. And then we try and communicate with them some long-term risks as well. So physical health problems like liver damage or kidney damage or heart disease, or mental health problems like depression and anxiety disorder. And then certainly we want to communicate to them there's a risk for overdose and death as well. So those are the kind of things that we try and talk through with youth as it relates to the risks in a way that they can relate to. I'm curious, I would love to hear from you all in the chat. What are some signs of substance use that you might be aware of? How might we know somebody might be using substances? Certainly, I want to say that it will vary depending on the substance, but there are some general signs and symptoms that we can look for. Awesome. I see some answers coming through the chat. Pinpoint pupils. Yes, that would be specific to opioid use. Changes in behaviors, withholding information, delay in response, tangential speaking, missed work, change in behavior, academic problems. Great. Yes. Great, great answers. You are absolutely right. There are some things that we can look for in young people to help make sure if they are experiencing something like substance use disorder or just engaging in substance use, that we can connect them to help early. So we want to look for things like shifts in mood and personality. You all identified several of those in the chat. So if they appear more depressed than usual, if they appear uncommunicative when previously they were communicative, they appear hostile and angry, secretive, unable to focus, unusually elated. Those are all some mood and personality signs and symptoms we can look for. We want to look for behavioral changes. You all identified again several of those changes in relationship with their social circle, absenteeism or a loss of interest in school when they were previously interested. Maybe becoming unusually clumsy, so lacking coordination, stumbling, periods of sleeplessness or sleeping too much, right? There are also some hygiene and appearance signs and symptoms that we can look for. Messier than usual appearance would be an example. Frequently red or flushed cheeks or face would be an example. And then we want to look for physical health signs and symptoms as well. So frequent sickness, unusually tired or lethargic, maybe slurred speech or rapid fire speech, sudden or dramatic weight loss or gain, skin abrasions or bruises. Those are all examples of physical health signs that we want to be aware of. We want to share some signs or symptoms of withdrawal as well. So if a young person's been using drugs for a long time or taking increasingly higher doses, they might feel quite unwell physically for a while if they stop. And that duration of what we call withdrawal depends on a lot of things: the substances they used, the length and intensity of use. We share this because this is a time, when a young person might come to you for help managing these symptoms they're experiencing, which is a good time to intervene and help them find the support that they need if they're experiencing a substance use disorder. All right, so let's talk about upstream prevention approaches. Our aim on the substance use prevention side is to create healthy, thriving communities. That's really our goal at home, at work, in school, in neighborhoods, in communities. We want individuals and communities to feel supported and connected and have access not only to resources, but to drug-free environments within the community. And that starts with young people. If we can prevent use from ever happening, there's an incredible return on investment. We're talking about the health and well-being of not only individuals, but families and ultimately communities, right? What prevention science also tells us is that those evidence-based strategies that we utilize are most effective when they address risk and protective factors. So what does that mean? First, we want to define what risk and protective factors are. All of us as individuals have biological and psychological characteristics that either put us at risk for or protect us from mental, emotional, and behavioral health problems, right? So, for example, a risk factor might be like genetic predisposition to addiction, like we talked about a moment ago. A protective factor might be positive self-image or self-control or coping skills. I like to think of risk factors as the rain and protective factors as the umbrella. But I want to expand our thinking about how to prevent young people from initiating in substance use as it relates to risk and protective factors. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that because substance use can start later in adolescence, we have a tremendous opportunity to prevent use from ever starting by engaging with young people early and often. And we have to keep in mind that we don't, as individuals, exist in isolation. We are all part of families, communities, and society, right? And within each of these contexts, there are a variety of risk and protective factors. So within families, an example of a risk factor might be parents or caregivers who use substances or experience mental health conditions. A protective factor might be parental or caregiver involvement. Within communities, a risk factor might be neighborhood violence. Protective factors might look like after school activities or positive relationships with adult mentors in the community. And then within society, risk factors might be norms and laws favorable to substance use. And a protective factor might be policies limiting availability of substances. We also want to keep in mind that different age groups have specific risk and protective factors that influence their behavioral health at any given time. And the actions that we need to engage in to impact those risk and protective factors really vary by developmental appropriateness. So we want to think about that as we target our prevention strategies. There are sort of three levels that we can think about when we're planning our efforts. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, the pyramid, we'll start there. So we want to start with universal or primary preventative interventions. These are strategies that take the broadest approach and focus on an entire population that hasn't necessarily been identified on the basis of risk. So primary or universal interventions might be in schools, in whole communities, in workplaces. This could look like community policies that encourage access to early childhood education. This could look like implementation or enforcement of anti-bullying policies in schools. Or this could look like education for all physicians in a community on youth substance use. Those would be examples of universal or primary interventions. Then there are selective or secondary preventative interventions. These are strategies that we really aim at individuals or a population subgroup whose risk of developing substance use disorder is significantly higher than average. So these strategies focus on biological, psychological, social risk and protective factors that are more prominent among high-risk groups. So this could look like prevention education for families living in poverty with young children, for example. And then at the top of the pyramid, those are indicated or tertiary preventative interventions. These are strategies that target high-risk individuals who are identified as having minimal but detectable signs or symptoms foreshadowing substance use disorder. These interventions really focus on the immediate risk and protective factors in the individual's environment. So this could look like a substance use program for high school students who are experiencing early signs of substance use, for example. So all that to say, since multiple contexts influence our lives, multiple strategies are necessary to prevent substance use among young people and to promote that emotional well-being. We also tend to hear a lot more about risk factors than protective factors, right? Efforts to improve youth health typically have focused on strategies designed to address specific risk factors. But what we're starting to see is that results from a growing number of studies really suggest that greater impacts might be achieved by also enhancing protective factors that help young people avoid multiple behaviors that might place them at risk for adverse health outcomes. So I think that's great news for us, which sort of leads us into some approaches, some upstream approaches to prevent substance use and really focus on some of those protective factors. So a lot of what we call prevention efforts, substance use prevention efforts, are actually early intervention efforts after a behavior has already started to appear. What prevention science tells us is that It is most effective to help young people build resilience to prevent harm before it occurs. That's why primary prevention takes place upstream. One of the key ways that we can engage in upstream prevention is to collaborate with our early childhood partners. Substance use and other problem behaviors that show up during adolescence have their roots in developmental changes that occur earlier, like we talked about. So prevention can be effective at any age, but it can have particularly strong effects when applied early in a person's life, when our development is most easily shaped and a child's life is most easily set on a positive course. So we want to think about moving upstream. We also want to think about creating protective environments. Prevention efforts that focus not only on individual behavior change, but on changes to the environment can really increase the likelihood of positive behavioral and health outcomes. So, creating environments that address those risk and protective factors where we as individuals live and work and play can really go a long way in help preventing substance use. So, this can look like cultural shifts at school, at home, in the community that normalize asking for help, or policies that provide opportunities to connect and support and normalize substance-free opportunities to, connect and engage. An example of a policy that normalizes substance-free opportunities to connect and engage would be something like not allowing alcohol at a youth or family-centered event in the community. So a policy that supports that would be an example of creating a protective environment. We also want to focus on promoting connectedness. When we say connectedness, we mean that feeling of being cared for, supported, right? That sense of belonging. Family, school, and community connectedness is extremely, extremely protective against both substance use and other behavioral health outcomes. When youth feel connected at school and at home, they are far less likely to experience negative health outcomes related to substance use and mental health, in addition to things like sexual risk and violence as well. We also know that youth who feel connected to adults and peers at school has been shown to have really positive effects on things like academic achievements, including like having higher grades, having better school attendance, staying in school longer. So, what this looks like at school and with our communities, we can reinforce positive behavior through praise and recognition. We can work to establish rules and routines and expectations that promote higher levels of connectedness. We can support student-led clubs at school and within community organizations that are really a safe space for students to socialize and support each other and connect with supportive adults. And we can also facilitate positive youth development activities like mentoring programs. So opportunities for youth to connect with adult mentors who can become their trusted adults, because we know that's incredibly protective. So that is what we mean when we say promoting connectedness. We also want to think about teaching problem solving and coping skills. So coping and problem solving skills are extremely critical in preventing individuals from getting to the point of crisis. And if they do find themselves in crisis, equipping them with the tools and the help they need to recover. So we want to broaden conversations we're having around these issues. We can't only talk about what hurts, right? We want to talk about what helps people get through those tough times. So when we're teaching problem solving and coping skills, we want to help normalize recovery, help seeking, and resilience. So normalizing that culture of help seeking, that getting help for a friend is being a good friend, that asking for help is a sign of courage and strength. We can highlight as a community, as a school, as a family, how to get help, where to get help, who we can ask for help, right? And what connecting to help looks like. So some examples of these skill building practices for problem solving and coping skills would be things like social emotional learning programs for youth, parenting skills programs, and then family relationship programs as well. The next thing to prevent substance use is to identify and support people who are at risk. We believe that it's everybody's job to be able to recognize and respond to signs of a substance use challenge happening to those around us. There are several intervention skills trainings out there. One of the trainings that we recommend, certainly isn't the only one, but the one that we have the most experience with would be youth mental health first aid. That is a great program that helps you identify when a youth might be experiencing any sort of challenge and how to connect them to help. If we recognize any signs or symptoms of a substance use challenge developing in young people, we want to be sure to follow our school or youth serving organization's policy on how to connect them to support. If we don't have a policy, I feel like that's our cue to advocate for one, right? Another great resource for support would certainly be 988. Utilizing 988 to connect a youth to support is a great resource, right? It's free, it's confidential, it's available 24/7. It doesn't have to be an emergency to use it, and you can call, text, or chat. So that is a great resource to have in our toolbox. Another best practice for schools and organizations would be to implement screening practices. We recommend Youth Expert, so youth screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. It's an integrated, comprehensive, evidence-based early intervention that can be implemented in primary care settings to identify, reduce, and prevent alcohol and drug use, misuse, and dependence. So we definitely want to think about our screening practices as agencies, organizations, schools, and then how we then connect a young person to help. One of the ways we can support people at risk and lessen harm and then prevent future risk is to offer cessation resources instead of punitive measures like suspension and expulsion. We want to provide support for substance use with the understanding, right, that it's a disease of the brain and not a moral failing or choice. So when we think about something like catching a young person vaping at school, we want to offer an opportunity to receive cessation and treatment resources and education as opposed to suspending or expelling them because we know that they need support to be able to find recovery from that substance. One of the ways that we want to lessen harm and prevent future risk as well is to connect young people to treatment if they need it. The first step to accessing treatment is to get an assessment. Many places do assessments. DECA is one of them. RADAC is another one that's very familiar to folks in Kansas. So it's good to know who offers youth substance use assessments in your area. Some schools may offer substance use treatment services as well as screening or prevention programs. So if a young person is ready and willing to make a change, our support is absolutely critical. As I mentioned, changing those habits around substance use is not easy. And we know that addiction is a disease. So willpower and self-resolve are not always enough to help the young person stop using substances. A young person might try to change or stop substance use more than once before they're successful. It's also important to understand that reoccurrence or relapse is a common part of the recovery process. So if a young person finds it difficult to give up the substance, altogether, cutting down is still worthwhile. However, we want to know what treatment options are available in our area to help connect a young person to that support that they need. So treatments certainly help manage addiction, but there is no cure, right? It's considered a chronic disease, meaning it lasts a long time. It needs to be managed with regular treatment. However, it's important to share with young people who might be experiencing this issue that people who follow treatment plans can go for many years leading healthy lives. It can be similar to other chronic conditions that people learn to manage, right? Like type 1 diabetes or heart disease. Generally speaking, for the youth you might be engaging with, there are two types of treatment for drug addiction. So behavior change, helping people learn to change the behaviors that trigger drug use, right? And medications, helping people manage cravings for some drugs like tobacco, alcohol, heroin, other opioids as well. So young people might have questions around that. And so it's important to know that information. It's also important for them to understand that the length of treatment might vary depending on a lot of factors, including the length of use, the amount of use, that type of thing. And so the most important thing that they can do is get that assessment and get connected to help so that they can work with that specialized individual to create a treatment plan that works for them. We also recommend young people talking to their primary care provider if they have access to one for more information on treatment. That's a great resource there. Woo, so we just covered a lot. And now I want to turn it over to my colleague Ariel to show you some of the things that we discussed in action. So Ariel oversees our youth empowerment and prevention chapters, and so I'm going to turn it over to her to provide us with a bit of a community example for what this can look like in your community.
Awesome. Thank you, Lydia. So hi, everyone. My name's Ariel. Like Lydia said, I'm a prevention specialist over at DECA. So here we have our Youth Empowerment and Prevention chapters, or YEP. YEP is a youth-led organization with the goal to promote positive change in Douglas County schools and our community. They started in 2020, and it started out as a county board that the youth sat on, and then it expanded to school chapters in 2021. So now each school has their own chapter of students. We're funded through county, state, and federal funding. And we use a shared risk and protective factor approach. So what that means is that we are working with HeadQuarters Kansas with Mike Hasselman on targeting the risk and protective factors that are factors for both substance misuse and suicide. So we work with HeadQuarters Kansas, and the students then are able to sort of see that dual approach. So like Lydia was telling us a little bit before about those different risk and protective factors, we found that there's a lot of overlap between those two behaviors, those two mental health challenges. So we're sort of able to target both of those by focusing on the shared risk and protective factors. And then our YEP chapters are also led through the Sources of Strength curriculum. So Sources of Strength is a strengths-based suicide prevention curriculum for young people. And so it really focuses on the strengths that young people have in their lives, those protective factors that they have to help them lead healthier lives, to help themselves to prevent suicide and the people around them as well. So we use a lot of that curriculum from Sources of Strength to help lead our chapters. Our chapters meet monthly, so each school sets their meeting schedule, whatever works for them. And then we also have representatives from each chapter come together quarterly, and we have quarterly meetings where we get representatives from each school. And so the students get to hear what other schools are doing, what other students are doing. And it's a really great opportunity for them to collaborate and get some new ideas. And then at these quarterly meetings, we pick out a theme. The students pick a theme for that semester. What each chapter does is each semester they put on a campaign or an event or a project, and it is surrounding either substance misuse or suicide. And the students, it's really student led. So the students get to pick what they want that project to look like, what topic they want to focus on, how they want to get the other students in the school to interact with it, to really spread the information that they're learning in YEP with the rest of the school. And so at these quarterly meetings, we pick a theme, a sort of an overarching theme for all of the chapters to sort of use to help lead and guide their semester-long project. And so in this semester, the students voted on the theme of empathy in action. So really focusing on what we can do to show empathy for other people and to keep mental health at the forefront of our minds, and what we can do to help sort of build a better culture around their school. And then we also have twice a year events for every chapter member to come and participate. And so we have our YEP kickoff that is usually at the beginning of the year to sort of kick it off. We do some education, we play some games, and we get excited for the year. And then at the end of the year, we have our YEP end of the year celebration. And that is really so that all the students can come together, celebrate all of the hard work that they did, and have some fun as well. And then here we have just some of the project examples. So like I had mentioned, each semester students put on some sort of campaign, and it's really student led. So the students get to come up with it. They get to determine what in their school do they see as most prevalent. What do they want to focus on? What are they hearing from their peers that's an issue? So here we have some pictures of just some examples of some of these projects. So one of my favorites is the one over on the far left. They have like a moon that says spread kindness, and then they put up a bunch of stars that are like different like sayings and different things of kindness, which I think is really cool. Looks like we have like a dance going on in that middle one, and then in the top right corner we have a picture from our youth empowerment summit, which we put on as well, which is a lot of fun. And that's something where we get to have speakers come to talk about substance misuse prevention and suicide prevention. We have some folks come talk about healthy relationships and preventing relationship violence as well. It's a really cool event as well. So just a little bit about the numbers. So we have currently 8 chapters in both middle and high schools, and we are currently onboarding 5 new chapters in our in Douglas County, which we're really excited to have them on board as well. We currently have about 150 students who are a part of YEP. And the sponsors, so the adults who sort of lead these chapters, ranked the success of the chapter efforts at about a 3.71 out of 5. And the students ranked the success of their chapter at a 4.2 out of 5. And that was for the last year. So both the sponsors and the students find it valuable, they find it successful, and the students really enjoy doing it. And here we have some of the feedback from those students talking about the importance of them participating in YEP. So they chose to join YEP because they want to help change some of the issues that youth in their community are facing. They love the positive atmosphere, the opportunity to share ideas and experiences. Mental health and health for youth is very important, and they want to be part of that change. And one activity that some schools did was the drunk goggles activity, and they thought that it gave students a great idea on how bad drinking can be and the repercussions that you can face from it. So these are just a few pieces of feedback that we received from students about being a part of YEP. And then we do have a short video that we will pull up in just a moment. And this is just one example of a campaign that was put on by a student in Eudora, which is a community in Douglas County. And you will notice in the video, she does say DCYP. That is YEP's former name. We recently did a little bit of a rebranding. So she will refer to YEP as DCYP, but it is the same program.
My name is Mackenzie Mayer, and I'm a senior at Eudora High School, and I'm a member of DCYP and Resist. DCYP and Resist are youth substance misuse organizations based here in Eudora and in Lawrence. Did you know that marijuana impairs motor skills and cognitive thinking for up to 36 hours after you use it? I'm a part of Engage Douglas County because I see substance misuse in my community and in my school, and I really want to help people become the best versions of themselves. To get involved with youth drug and alcohol prevention, go to www.engagedouglascounty.org.
Awesome, thank you. So that was just one example of one of the campaigns that Eudora High School put on as one of their semester projects. And I'm going to pass it back over to Lydia. Thank you all for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ariel. I am very proud to share Ariel's example because I think there's always room to grow, but we are seeing in action the benefits of moving upstream, right? Creating those protective environments, that positive opportunity for young people to get involved, promoting that youth connectedness, that adult youth connectedness, and then helping them. It's not just about having a positive place to be, but also equipping them with the tools to recognize and respond to signs and symptoms in young people, in their peers and themselves, to be able to get connected to help. So I think this is a project that we feel very proud of, and that anybody has the capability and potential to do and see great success with. So that brings us to, we have, I think, just a couple of minutes for a few questions. I did see one in the chat related to resources for treatment in Southeast Kansas. I would recommend utilizing the SAMHSA treatment locator. Ariel, would you mind pulling that up and dropping that link in the chat? That would be a great place to find area specific or county specific or region specific treatment options available in your area. I see a question about information to share about drug-induced psychosis. Have had 2 students diagnosed recently. Yes, so this is certainly a risk that we're seeing, particularly as it relates to, like I talked about, the increase of THC in marijuana. And I have quite a bit of information that I could offer you related to how to support a student there, and sort of resources, not only to support the student, but family and anybody else who might be connected to that student. So I just dropped my email in the chat. If you reach out to me, I'd be happy to connect you with some additional resources there. Heather had a great question about how something like YEP can be started in other counties or schools. So we are very fortunate that we receive county dollars to be able to implement youth empowerment and prevention. But I think one of the beauties of something like YEP is that it can be replicated and implemented wherever you are and whatever kind of resources you have. I might recommend Y-Link, so youth leaders in Kansas. If you're coming to us from Kansas, that's a great opportunity to receive some seed funding to be able to start an initiative like this. And it also comes with lots of training and resources as well. Ariel, would you mind finding the Y-Link link as well? But that would be a great, if you're looking for funding to get something like this started, that would be a great resource there. If you want to have a further conversation with Ariel about how to get a board up and running, a youth board, she'd be happy to talk you through that as well. And I believe Meg Hasselman, who is the other YEP sponsor, is on the line too. Both of them are incredible at this work and would be happy to chat with you, kind of walk you through, like, I guess, success that we saw and lessons learned as we grew. We'd be happy to share that information with you as well. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to share sort of the key takeaways for our time today, and then I'll turn it back over to Christy. So the main things that we want you to know walking out of here today is that data consistently shows that the majority of youth are not using substances, which is great news and provides us that opportunity to prevent use, right? To ensure that young people can lead full and healthy lives. We also know that connectedness is incredibly protective against substance use disorders and other behavioral health issues. So if we can work to move upstream and build connectedness in our communities, with our families, at schools, at community organizations, we can really make some good headway there. And then what we know is that youth drug trends change over time, right? What I would share with you in the next year might not look like what I shared with you today, but prevention science is evidence-based, effective, and impactful, regardless of the new trends that are coming down the pipeline. So that is what we will leave you with. You have both Ariel and I's email, and we look forward, hopefully, to this being not the end of the conversation, but the start. So reach out to us if you have any questions or want to talk through some things. We're here for you. Christy, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you for the time today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lydia, for the presentation, and Ariel for sharing about the YEP chapters. And thanks to everyone for attending today. We will send the slides and follow-up materials to your email. Just give us a little bit to process them, and they should probably be out tomorrow. They will also be available on the Telehealth ROCKS website and the Facebook page, and those links are there for you in the chat. The certificates will be sent again in December and in April. So if you haven't had a chance to type your name in the chat, go ahead and do it now. Just first and last name is great. We double check those to make sure we get everybody's attendance correct. And then if you have any follow-up questions or any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask here today, feel free to send that to Telehealth ROCKS at kumc.edu. That link is also in the chat, and we will direct it to the right person to get you the answer that you need. So we appreciate you joining us today, and we will see you next month on December 6th at noon for our discussion on bullying. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.